Could you tell your classmates to come in so we could start? Could you tell your classmates to come in so we could start? Could you tell your classmates to come in so we could start? Could you tell your classmates to come in so we could start? Could you tell your classmates to come in so we could start? It's 3:30, so we can start. They'll just catch up. Is that okay with you? So tell them to come in.
Yes, doctor, we can start now.
Okay? Some people are still for admission. Okay. So good afternoon. So today would be a continuation of our environmental and other occupational aspects of public health. And for this afternoon, we have three topics, mainly air pollution, vector and vermin control, and food sanitation. Okay? Uh, these short topics were just lumped up in one session. Okay? So, in relation to our previous lectures, of course, we have your soil and your water lectures last week. We tackle air pollution, and with India being number one in waste production and your water production, water pollution, I guess it's not anymore of a surprise that uh, India is also number one in air pollution. But then again, it's not enough to reiterate that again, per capita, India would not be the number one air pollution producer. It's just because of the number of people who live in India and the sheer number of urban cities in India, hence the air pollution statistics um, that I have shown. Okay, so by definition, of course, air pollution would be putting contaminants in the air in sufficient quantities such that it threatens human, plant, animal life, and property. So, for example, sulfur dioxide, nitrogen dioxide, carbon monoxide, they're present in our atmosphere, yes. But what makes air pollution different, it becomes increasing in quantity such that it becomes deleterious to human, animal, and plant life and property. Okay? So if you would look at history, development became accelerated come 17th, 16th century, and this coincided with your industrial revolution. And this would be equated with what? What fueled the Industrial Revolution? Anyone? Well, I am admitting
Coal,
some of your classmates.
ma'am, coal.
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 Coal-powered factories that produced a lot of technology and eventually led us to where we are now. So that fueled development some 200, 300 years ago, but you know when there is development, what was the drawback, at what cost. Of course, if it's fueled by coal, what would you expect to happen? What would you expect to happen if you have a lot of coal factories?
Pollution.
Okay, of course, your coal would produce byproducts, or your factories would produce byproducts, samples of which would be sulfur dioxide, nitrogen, carbon monoxide. So these would be particulate and other particulate matters that would pollute the air. So what will we do? Shut down the factories? Same way that, remember, your factories would also pollute the water, would produce waste, etc. What do you think? Would
Ma'am,
it
Proper
on
waste management.
make sure that we manage these factories properly, regulate it properly? That's correct. Make sure that they follow standards, because again, we still need the things that we produce with this, the factories produce. But then again, we have to balance everything such that we do not compromise our environment in the long run. Okay? So another, of course, major contributor to air pollution would be smoke. Okay. You know that it contains a lot of things and toxins that would be affecting your air. Okay. So this is one of the questions. Types of air pollution. So primary versus secondary. So primary would be your particulate matter. Usually these are elements, carbon monoxide, sulfur dioxide, etc. If it's already processed, meaning it is combined to form, for example, ozone and smog, so this would be secondary. Okay, the difference would be clear. Okay. Oops. I opened the wrong. I'm sorry. Anyways, so I think I wasn't able to save the ones that I edited. Anyways, so the missing slides were statistics on India and their strategies to combat air pollution. Okay? So what we've had would be the establishment of the National Air Quality Index, which states the goal that your uh, 20 to 30% reduction of particulate matter size 2.5 and 10 would be reduced by the year 2024. Of course, establishment of institutions that would research on air pollution and tree planting uh, in Green Valley, in Aravela Valley for 10 years. Okay? So there's also a national center that was established and with the goals that would entail strategies that would decrease air pollution. And of course, remember, why do we have to control air pollution as public health or medical specialist? You know that a lot of diseases would be indirectly or directly be affected by air pollution, particularly asthma and COPD, etc. Who has asthma here? Anyone? And for example, where fireworks are prevalent in New Year, I am an asthmatic. So New Year, what do? I usually close my house. I don't go out starting December 31 because fireworks are abound and um, I couldn't take it because it would automatically lead to an asthmatic attack. Okay? So by the way, also the answer to question of what percent would fireworks contribute to would be 5%. Okay? So for vector and vermin control, so your vector would be anything or any creature that would be responsible to transferring your pathogen. So it could have many routes. Most often, it's your fecal oral route that makes spread of disease harder to contain. Okay, so you have your vector control. So any means to control vectors would be the one important in this matter, and it's the only way. For example, a disease has no cure, such as Zika or dengue. It's the only way to prevent these diseases. Of course, you control the ones that would transmit the disease. So remember your epidemiologic curve. You have to have your host, you have to have your agent in an environment. And of course, to an imbalance of the three would lead to disease, such that we have to control at least the agent so there would not be disease. Okay? Okay? Most common would be your insect control. So we have to control insects because this would bring hypersensitivity either to their bites or their hair scales, or infestation, or bring about disease. Okay, so remember the types of vector. So it could either be mechanical or biologic. So mechanical, if it is brought about, for example, legs of the mosquito, then it would contaminate the food that you will ingest. So that would be a mechanical vector. Biologic, for example, if you ingest it, For example, a parasite, for example, schistosoma, etc., and then the eggs would multiply inside the body, then that would be biologic. All right. So most of these concepts um, would you have encountered in parasitology and microbiology as well. But we will focus on the vector being an agent of disease in general. So knowing the vector and controlling it is important because it spells the difference between being well and being sick. Okay, so we have to control control measures include controlling the environment, such as the breeding ground, the pits, open latrines, biologic, chemical, the with the examples in the video that you saw. And it could be further classified into defensive measures and offensive measures with your protective clothing, repellents, and your offensive measures being the ones that actually attack the population. So you have to know how to identify these defensive, offensive measures and how it's classified as mechanical, chemical, or biologic control. Okay? So that would be for vectors. For example, what would be an example of a natural or environmental control? Your rat population would be increased. So what happens? You could unleash a cat, and because they are natural predators of the rat, that would be an environmental control for your rat population. Okay? So for food sanitation, it's important because a lot of illnesses may be foodborne. Okay? More often, of course, Filipinos love to celebrate Christmas. Most often, most will have acute gastroenteritis come January 2, January 3. And the culprit would be eating the leftover of the festivities of the Christmas season. So most would complain of eating salad beyond what it's supposed to. So a lot of illness would come from food because it's a vehicle of transfer because we ingest it. So we have to ensure food sanitation. So we have to administer and enforce laws that would ensure food sanitation, educate, restrain sale of food which are decomposed, adulterated, and mislabeled, safe handling of perishable products, and developing methods for minimum contamination. So we would encounter some examples later as far as food sanitation is concerned. Okay, so foodborne illness, as mentioned in the video, so there are three types of contaminant. So there's biologic, if it's a microbe. It could be physical, if it's a foreign object, such as sawdust, any material, and chemical, if it's a toxic substance. Okay, most common food safety error would be what? Using a non-food container uh, containing foreign objects and then using it to contain food. That's the most common mistake. So you have to what? Use containers particularly for food, containers particularly for non-food items. And that's the most common error that we have with regards to food safety. So remember concept of food decomposition. So remember fermentation, that would be the breakdown of carbohydrates with the formation of acids. And putrefaction, this is disintegration of protein, usually resulting in foul-smelling products. So this is also an answer to the quiz. So gram-positive spore-forming rod-like is Clostridia, one of the common um, microorganisms for food poisoning, with Staphylococcus and botulinum. Okay? So how do you prevent? So for food to be spoiled, so it has to follow three conditions. So there must be sufficient contamination, good medium for the growth, and it must remain at room temperature or above for hours. So how we could prevent this would be to avoid food handlers with infection and clean methods with the use of covers. So food should not be at room temperature or above for longer than necessary. So for botolino, canned food, we avoid if there is spoilage, or if we cannot consume it for at once, we transfer it to a container. And if we buy canned food, we should avoid the ones with obvious dents or obvious rust, because that would already be compromised. So these are the different foodborne illness. So typhoid, cholera, and parasites. One thing about parasites would be cooking food properly, because of a lot of vectors would die because of heat, and that is a problem for cultures who love to eat raw meat, raw fish, or love it half cooked. So for chicken, there's no such thing such as half-cooked chicken. It's only well done, because you have to kill the salmonella. Okay? Um, for cultures such as Japan, which would be fond of eating raw fish, you have to be on the lookout on certain parasites. Okay? So simple things. For example, your cutting board, you have to have two separate ones. One is for cooked meat, one is for raw meat. So it's wrong to use just one cutting board and use it for raw and use it for your cooked meat, because raw meat and cooked meat should not be in contact with one another. Okay? Remember, in your video, there's a concept called cross contamination, temperature abuse, and food handling. That would be the ones that we have to avoid. Okay? Also, when you put things at the ref, you don't put raw meat over the cooked food items. So ideally, the raw materials or the raw food should be down. That is contrast to the uh, refrigerators that we often see. What? That the freezer would be on top of the uh, bottom area, which would usually contain the cooked food. So the correct order actually would be the freezer would ideally be at the bottom, because that's where the raw food would be. Okay? Such that policies to prevent would be having solutions, of course, public awareness, vaccination against typhoid and cholera, so that we could improve or prevent outbreaks, to improve our awareness regarding food sanitation. For example, well, it's common. What do they say about best before dates? I'm sure you have experienced this when you buy food then forget about it. Oh, it's expired. What do you usually say? Do you still eat it or do you dispose?
Dispose, ma'am.
Dispose? Not always. Say some will still eat it because of economic reasons. Oh, it still tastes good, so we could still eat it. But if it tastes bad, of course, it's our human reaction to avoid, to expel it. So we vomit and we have loose bowel movements. What else? What else would be the problem with regards to food? How many times can you reheat food until you consume it?
Once
Only
only.
once or twice.
Only once. Okay. And that's the problem if you prepare a lot of food or you're just, well, that's the problem of living alone. You cannot consume it in one sitting. So, what happens? You have lots of leftover to reheat again and again sometimes. And you can just reheat it once. So, what do? You just take out a portion that you could consume and then that's the one you reheat. That's okay. But you get the whole container, reheat it all, and then uh, go bring it back to the refrigerator. That's wrong and will bring about spoilage. Okay. Indian food, is it prone to spoilage? I am not aware. Would your but their curry as a spice prolongs food life, right? It gets prolonged. It does not spoil easily. Am I correct? Could someone enlighten me? Curry,
What, ma'am?
curry takes long to spoil. You could store it for long.
Maybe overnight, ma'am.
O just overnight. After one night, it gets spoiled already.
If the season uh is hot, I think.
If the
If the weather is hot, ma'am.
if it's winter, of course, if it's cold, it gets prolonged. Remember the temperature. You have to have 41 degrees. You should not expose it for 41 degrees for more than 4 hours. Okay. So you add vinegar to prolong the food life. Okay, that's also one strategy. Of course, for your food handlers, ensure hand washing, vaccinate it against hepatitis A, typhoid, and cholera. Okay, what else?
What
Let
about salads, ma'am?
salad that's prone to spoilage because that has mayonnaise most of them, unless it's the one with oil, with just the vinaigrette, or yeah. But the ones that are cream based, at least you put cream or mayonnaise, that would be very much prone to spoil. And that's the main culprit for acute gastroenteritis every January too. O ate leftover salad of New Year, of Christmas season, now having loose bowel movements.
How do we wash uh, salads, ma'am? For example, how do we wash lettuce or tomato if we are eating it raw?
You have to wash it. What do you mean? How do we wash?
Like, what is the correct procedure or method? Because Is it with tap water or chlorinated water?
It depends on your water source. If your water source is contaminated, of course, you would have a problem with your washing of vegetables. So, others would have a practice that they use even distilled water just for washing. But then again, um, if you are sure of your water source, of your tap water source, then it would be fine. It will depend on your location.
Thank you, ma'am.
Raw tomatoes and raw, what's the other one? Raw lettuce. So for salad, yeah. Indian food, aside from the being vegetarian, is there room for raw meat, raw fish, not part of your cuisine? Or is
Not
there?
really, ma'am.
Not really. All of them cooked?
Yeah, most of them is usually the vegetables and the fruits that are raw.
Yeah. So no raw fish like in Japan, no raw meat such as we have raw meat here. Just just cooked with vinegar to kill the bacteria, but technically it's raw. None?
No, ma'am.
Okay. At least not much of a problem in your culture. I think curry has a long shelf life also.
If it is refrigerated, yes, ma'am. But if it's not refrigerated, it won't last.
It won't last also. Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
An ingredient that you love to use also is coconut milk. Coconut milk also spoils easily. So those are the ones that you have to be careful of. Okay? So our topics are light, okay? Because this would be environmental issues, etc. So it's like a kind of a mental break before we go into our community topics and alternative medicine topics. Okay? So any questions for these three short topics? I think most of you did well in the quiz. Average would be 4.2. So some would have a few one or two mistakes, most probably because of carelessness. Okay. So expect within the week an individual email containing your first two long exam grades so that you would know how. Some did not input their names and student number properly. It could not be detected by forms. So some of the names I couldn't see. So I would also put out a list so you know if your exam was missing or not. Okay? Expect it within the week. Okay, I will try to finish it by this week so you would know where you are at. Okay? But usually for third year, no problem. As long as you take the exams, etc., and do the requirements, the video at the end of the semester, you'll do fine. Okay? Any questions? So if there's none, you may leave this meeting. Thank you for attending this session. See you.
ధోని సైలెన్స్ వచ్చి మా బావ కూర్చుంటాడు.
Thank you, doctor.
Okay. Goodbye.
Thank you, ma'am.